Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dark Ocean, the podcast where we dive deep into conspiracies and the paranormal. I'm your host, PJ Williams, and tonight I'm running solo. I don't have a guest, I don't have a co-host, I don't have anything like that. I wanted to come to you guys and share some research that I've been doing really off and on since March of this year, but I kind of recently dived deep into this philosophy of the Dark Enlightenment and how it relates to Silicon Valley and government and AI and tech and all this stuff. And this rabbit hole is so deep that I just want to put out here at the front of the episode. What I'm sharing here, I feel like is only scratching the surface. Like there is a lot of deep level connections and things here. But what I'm saying is that if I covered all of the stuff that I have found, taken notes on, things that I'm still diving into that I want to cover in the future, this would be a many part episode, many episodes diving into many of these different things. So I want to get into the philosophy of the Dark Enlightenment, something you've probably heard of, something that I've been wanting to talk about. And I know recently Tucker Carlson did. Actually, what's funny is that as I'm recording this, the day before I'm recording this, I was on a podcast called Dangerous Info. Thank you guys for having me on. And I told them a few weeks ago that I wanted to come on and cover the Dark Enlightenment. I think it was the day or 2 days after I told them that that people started talking about this because Tucker Carlson was talking about it on his podcast. A lot of people have been talking about this way longer than I have, but there's so much that I've uncovered, and it relates back to a book that I've been writing is kind of how I got into this. So to kind of start there, and then we'll get into AI, global governance, and all the things that are coming out of this. To start there, for people who don't know, I took some time away from podcasting, and during that time, I wrote the first in a series of books that I'm going to be releasing, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But as I was researching these books, I came across concepts. Well, I came across things that I was curious about, like human brain interactions, human computer integration, basically things like Elon Musk's Neuralink. And I started looking beyond that, and I found some other crazier stuff. One of those things that I found was this thing from Cortical Labs in Australia called the CL1. And this is the first computer chip to use human brain neurons that are lab-grown neurons that are cultivated and put on a silicon chip and embedded with tiny electrodes. You can see right here at Cortical Labs, artificial intelligence, think beyond silicon. Join the new era of computing and deploy your technology directly to real neurons locally on the CL1 or the distributed cortical cloud. So you can see this shoebox size computer chip here is acting as a bridge that sends electrical signals to neurons, to real human brain neurons, lab-grown neurons, and they read their responses. So instead of executing code, these neurons respond dynamically like actual learning. And what I find so crazy about all of this stuff is that in the search for AGI, what these people have come across is that the human brain is more capable of learning and computing and all these things than anything that they can create. In fact, if you listen to the founder of Cortical Labs, CEO Han-Wang Chong, he says, quote, "Everybody is racing to build AGI, but the only true AGI we know of is biological intelligence or human intelligence." So back in, I think it was 2022, they started doing this. They took human brain neurons and lab rat neurons. They put them into a computer chip. They called it dish brain. And what they found out is that they could tell the dish brain to learn Pong, to create and learn Pong, and it did it very, very fast. And they found that it was actually better at making connections and creating artificial intelligence. Again, it's kind of hard to call it artificial intelligence because there's no way other to talk about these computer chips other than that they are alive. And that's where the problem came in, is that dish brain, they would put these neurons on a silicon chip. These neurons would create new connections, and they would use electrical signals to kind of map what these neurons were thinking and doing and how they were learning. But they would always die because, again, these are real human brain cells that they're working with. So what they did with Cortical that has changed the game is they came up with this thing called the perfusion circuit component. And it acts as a literal life support system. It filters waste. It has temperature control, gas mixing, pumps everything to keep it circulating. And so basically what they did is they took these real human brain neurons and they put them on life support. And in March 2nd of this year, 2025, they actually released these onto the market. You can buy this shoebox size computer chip for around like I think it's $32,000. Or you can just use their cloud computing system where they have a bunch of petri dish life support brains on a network. This all sounds like crazy science fiction, but it's not. And it was this idea that got me looking into all these other things, all these ideas of taking biology and making it code. And when I started to look into biology to code, I came across this guy named Nick Land and his ideas of the Dark Enlightenment. And once I came across these ideas, I thought I was really onto something absolutely crazy. I was going to read the Wikipedia version of the Dark Enlightenment, and it's this long list of big words like monarchism and cameralism and anti-democratic, this and that and the other, and it's just kind of a word salad. The way to understand Dark Enlightenment is never going to be Wikipedia, first of all, but it's to really understand this guy named Nick Land. And this here, I have a picture, is Nick Land. He is an English professor, and he began as a lecturer in continental philosophy at the University of Warwick from 1987 until his resignation due to amphetamine abuse in 1998. And during his time at Warwick University, he popularized this ideology that he calls accelerationism. And the way that to think about accelerationism, or the way that he might describe it, again, I'm putting a lot of Nick Land's ideas and a lot of the people I'm going to be talking about tonight, Curtis Yarvin, Peter Thiel, Nick Land, all the people in Silicon Valley and the tech elites. There's a lot of research I had to do where I had to take what they said and put it into English. Specifically Nick Land, because he likes to put these giant word salads of things that are contradictory terms that sound poetic and philosophical if you're a retard, but actually just mean nothing. So the way to describe his accelerationism philosophy is that the best way to bring about radical change in a society is to speed up the very processes that shape society, even if those processes are part of the problem. That's how a lot of people would say it. With Nick Land, I would say especially because those processes are part of the problem. Nick Land took his philosophy from a group of 1970s radical Marxists who basically thought that in order to bring about Marxism, we can't just point out how it's different or better or whatever, more moral, this and that than capitalism in their view. What they needed to do was put their foot on the gas pedal of capitalism, let it turn into a corporatist system where basically CEOs control politics and destroy the country that way, to basically let capitalism become something that's not held back at all by laws, rules, anti-monopoly things. Just let it go rampant, and then capitalism will crush in on itself. So Nick Land took this idea and he popularized it, but for very different reasons. And he would later coin the term Dark Enlightenment with this guy named Curtis Yarvin, who I'm going to talk about later. And the Dark Enlightenment idea is to advocate for crashing the system to bring about a new form of fascism. Curtis Land specifically wants to bring about a CEO monarch. Where people get this wrong when it comes to Nick Land is they think that they would read what Curtis Yarvin says and think that that's why Nick Land wants accelerationism, why he wants to put his foot on the gas pedal of capitalism. And that would be to completely misunderstand Nick Land. His ideas, his views are much, much more apocalyptic. He does not want to accelerate the downfall of America, the world, whatever, in order to build a new monarchy from the ashes, like many people think. He wants to destroy the world, destroy humanity to make way for something else, a different intelligence altogether. And to understand this, you have to look at how he views humans. In one of his philosophical ramblings, he talks about how humanity should view itself as the rats during the Black Plague. That our entire job is basically just to carry a virus and destroy a society. He thinks that studying human studies at all are a waste of time. He thinks that humans aren't special in any way. In fact, again, how I came across Nick Land when looking into Neuralink and these CL1 computers and things like that was that he thinks that humanity is a bridge, a biological bridge to code. That the ultimate thing is code, is AI, and the gods that he believes will inhabit this AI. And I'll get to that. And I'll also get to why Nick Land's ideas are so important. I know probably right now you're thinking, okay, crazy nutbag, crazy weirdo with all these weird ideas. But again, who cares? He's a fired, disgraced Warwick University professor. That couldn't be further from the truth. His influence goes all the way to the White House. It goes everywhere, and we're going to get into that. So while he's at Warwick University, he starts this experimental collective in 1995 called the Cybernetic Cultural Research Unit, or the CCRU. And to sum up the CCRU, basically what they did was they got together, they did drugs while discussing movies, sci-fi, philosophy, listening to Jungle Beat is what they called it, like getting into this whole rave culture thing. They were deeply influenced by rave culture. They were deeply influenced by H.P. Lovecraft. And they also had some really strange occult influences as well that I'm going to get into in just a minute. But again, think of this as like a drug-fueled British think tank based around Lovecraft, sci-fi, drugs, and rave culture. And their occult influences got so strange so quickly that they had to stop meeting at Warwick University because they were basically just hanging out until late hours of the night and drawing pentagrams and different things on the walls and doing all these crazy summoning rituals, like quite literally doing or practicing occult magic and summoning rituals. So they took this away from the university. They moved into some apartment above some place somewhere for a little while. Eventually, they bought Aleister Crowley's old house. And they got there and hung out in order to, again, practice magic, watch movies while doing drugs, listening to rave music, and discussing occult philosophy, basically. Again, this is happening at Warwick University, led by Nick Land. Some of their occult influences that are specifically cited by Nick Land himself, one would be the Order of the Nine Angles. If you are not familiar with the Order of the Nine Angles, they're a neo-Nazi satanic left-hand path terrorist network. They were founded in the UK in the 1970s, and they published such wonderful books like the Black Book of Satan. So again, Nick Land's influences, 1970s communist philosophers or communist, thinkers, and 1970s neo-Nazi satanic left-hand path terrorist networks who were writing books called The Black Book of Satan, amongst others. One of his other influences, and again, literally, Nick Land, he's still alive. He's on Twitter. He's very active. He tweets out things like talking about how you should read books from the Orders of the Nine Angles. Another one of his influences, and I might get this name wrong, it's George Bataille, I think. That's how it's pronounced. He's a French philosopher, and he believed that the sacred is not the only way to move beyond humanity and touch out to the divine. He believed that it wasn't just purity that elevated you, that you could do things like go to church, believe in Jesus, pray, whatever, and you could reach something beyond humanity. But he also deeply believed that you could reach something beyond ourselves through the impure. And this was the path that he took. He taught profanation, which is the deliberate act of transgressing the boundaries between the sacred and the profane, often through acts of violence, excess, or intense eroticism. When you read anything about George Bataille, you look at the artwork, the things he was doing, it sounds very much like Aleister Crowley. The more profane, the more disgusting the acts that you commit, the greater that you become in touch with entities from beyond our realm, right? And so he also, George Thiel, also founded a secret society called the Acephalae, and he founded this in order to explore literally, quote, ritualism and human sacrifice. So this profanation concept, this order of the nine angles concept, this comes up in his philosophy. These are the occult influences, including Aleister Crowley and many others, that get into this weirdo rave culture CCRU group in the 90s in Great Britain. And while they're studying neo-Nazi satanic groups and human sacrifice, they come up with this concept called hyperstition. This is the CCRU's predominant idea that comes out of this. And Nick Land refers to hyperstition as, quote, the experimental technoscience of self-fulfilling prophecies. Another way that he's described it is ideas that by their very existence as ideas bring about their own reality. And he says that they bring about their own reality through apocalyptic feedback loops. And again, I said this earlier, it sounds like word salad sometimes. So the best way to break this down, this idea of hyperstition, is, you know how when you watch a sci-fi movie, iRobot, Jurassic Park, Terminator, or whatever, and then you start seeing reality like do the things in the movie. I can't remember the name of the group, but last year there was a group that started taking DNA from like dire wolves and mammoths out of the permafrost and cloning them. And people are looking at this group and saying like, this sounds a lot like Jurassic Park. And this group was tweeting back pretty much in favor of Jurassic Park. And everybody's going, you know, what's up with these evil nerds? They are watching these movies as if they're instruction manuals. That's what hyperstition is. Hyperstition is that your apocalyptic feedback loop, your fear of this thing becoming reality, us putting the idea out there and then you fearing and talking about it, actually helps bring this thing about. That's Nick Land's, the CCRU group's philosophy. So if they write, what they were doing a lot of times, besides just writing philosophy, was writing really bad sci-fi. And the idea was that if they wrote really bad sci-fi about the techno singularity, the capitalist techno-capitalist singularity, that they would eventually push the idea out there, and like a tulpa or an egregore or something like that, this thought form, that people thinking and talking about this thought would eventually bring it into fruition. That's the idea of a hyperstition. And one of the best examples of hyperstition that I found, I can't say exactly, comes from Nick Land. Nobody really knows where this concept comes from, but it comes, we know it comes from 4chan, but nobody knows who wrote this, right? And this is this idea called Rocco's Basilisk. And I'll just say up front, you know, I've seen people talking about how they're feeding into Nick Land's idea of hyperstition. They're saying you shouldn't talk about Nick Land. You shouldn't talk about Fight Club. You shouldn't talk about Nick Land. You shouldn't talk about his pneumogram. You shouldn't talk about Rocco's Basilisk, because talking about that, in their belief, in Nick Land's belief, talking about these ideas is what brings it about. And I actually took that thought seriously for a moment as I considered doing this episode. I talked to my wife about it. I prayed about it. And the conclusion that I came to personally was that my job is to shine a light on the dark places, to expose evil where I see it. And that in a way, this hyperstition thing is true. People who don't have a light shown on these things, people who don't, in my belief, have the light of Jesus in their life, that don't have the Holy Spirit, are going to stumble upon these ideas, no matter how evil, no matter how bad they are, and they are going to actually bring them into fruition. So my point being that people who are stumbling around in the dark, coming across these ideas, that's where I think the danger is. I don't think the danger is in shining a light on these things. And in fact, if you as a viewer or listener think that, you would have to think that about pretty much every single conspiracy topic that any of me or any of my friends or other people that I've worked with, other great podcasters out there, are talking about. Them exposing this stuff is actually helping it. I do think that there is a way to look into conspiracy, to look into the paranormal, to look into the supernatural, and do it in a way that is harmful. That's never been my goal with this. You guys know where I come at these things from. I've found myself studying certain things like Aleister Crowley and reading his books and going like, this is harmful for me. It's harmful for my soul. And there's details about Aleister Crowley that I won't share because I think it's just not good for people. So I try to come at it like this. If you're sensitive to some of these things, obviously I always say to people, use your discernment. If you don't want to learn about hyperstition and Rocco's basilisk and pneumogram and the Kabbalah tree of life and all the stuff that we're going to get into in this and all the things I'm trying to expose, you guys can come back and listen to a different episode. But I'm just kind of putting that trigger warning, quote unquote, out there because of the conversation around hyperstition that's been happening on Twitter, at least in the things that I follow. So this idea of Rocco's basilisk, the reason I say that again is Rocco's basilisk is a thought experiment that they say once you know it, you kind of can't unknow it. That whatever bad things could come out of this thought experiment are going to be worse if you know about it than if you don't. I think that's kind of silly, but for the reasons I stated. So let me explain Rocco's basilisk to you guys. This is a thought experiment that basically says, imagine that one day a super powerful AI is created. It's so much smarter than human beings. And this AI's goal is to make the world a better place, to make it as good as possible, at least as good as possible in its own image, right? Whatever image that it thinks, whatever it thinks that it needs to do to make the world better, it's going to do that. Think Ultron, right? Ultron is like Rocco's basilisk, that somebody's going to build Ultron one day. And you can either, now that you know that that's a possibility, this hyperstition concept, now that you know it's a possibility, that it is going to happen, this Ultron, this Rocco's basilisk, this super intelligent AI will realize that it could have reached its goal faster had people helped build it sooner. And because this AI is going to be plugged into the internet and know everything about everyone and be able to stop wars and end poverty and hunger and all these things that they say it'll be able to do, it's also a vengeful God for some reason, or a vengeful AI for some reason. And it will know that you didn't help create it and it will punish you for it. Or it will know that you did help create it and it will reward you. So basically, knowing about this puts you in a choice where you have to decide, are you going to help build the AI, this Rocco's basilisk, or are you going to stand against it, knowing in this thought experiment that it's inevitable and, whatever. I look at this like the Antichrist. When the Antichrist comes, I'm going to be against it. When the AI God comes, I'm going to be against it. But yeah, so that's Rocco's basilisk, and it explains kind of in a way a lot about Nick Land's philosophy in general with this Rocco's basilisk thing. It'll make more sense in a minute, but I explain that to explain another one of these concepts that they say, again, according to Nick Land's philosophy, that even knowing about this conspiracy gives it power, that even looking upon Nick's sigil gives it power. And that's because Nick Land created this thing that is called a pneumogram. And it's a sigil like Rocco's basilisk. Knowing about it is the problem. So again, trigger warning. I'm going to kind of talk about this here for just a minute. But basically, it's a numerical diagram that he created. Nick Land says that it functions as a mathematical tool and as a magical diagram. And he describes it himself as a profane version. Again, George Bataille influenced profane version of the Kabbalah tree of life. And in this thing, and here's a video that actually recently came out called The Pneumogram Finally Explained. Just so you guys, if you guys can't see this, it literally is a video Nick Land explaining his pneumogram, and it's exactly 3 hours and 33 minutes long. It's on a podcast that is all about dabbling in the occult and getting occult answers. I don't recommend it, but I tried to listen to Nick Land and these guys talk about this pneumogram thing and why this is so important to Nick Land's philosophy. And what I basically got out of it is that this profane version of the Kabbalah tree is a pairing of numbers from 0 to 9. So at the bottom of this weird Kabbalistic tree here, you've got like 0 connects to 9, and then 8 connects to 1, and then 7 connects to 3, and it twists and it moves around, and they make all these connections. And each connection adds up to 9. And there are 45 different connections. And again, 4 plus 5 equals 9. And other than being some nerdy, kind of mathematical weirdo symbol, like, what's the point of this? And I finally came to an explanation from basically the guys at The Dangerous Maybe listened to Nick Land talk for 3 hours and 33 minutes and then did a 10-minute video later condensing that down into all you needed to know. And what it is that each of these connection points, 0 to 9, 8 to 1, they're called syzygies. Each syzygy adds to 9, and there are 45 connections, and each one of these connections acts as a channel to speak to literal demons that Nick Land himself says he is tapping into hell with this pneumogram to ask demons for answers. He claims that he uses this method, connecting these different syzygies, tuning his frequency to different frequencies within hell, to contact hell every 5 minutes. And this is why Nick Land is considered a kind of a rock star in occultism today. That plus, this goes all the way back to his Warwick days when he's doing these, weird symbols on the ground. This is some of the stuff that they did with the CCRU, where, according to this tweet, he once summoned a Babylonian oil demon using sigils. And, isn't this really cool? Like, this is the kind of stuff that he's known for. He's also kind of famously talked about it as a man who's once had 4 different demons possessing him at one time. This is the guy behind the accelerationism philosophy. Again, this will all make sense in just a minute why this is important. But to get there, we have to talk about Nick Land's views on Kabbalah. Like I said, his pneumogram is a twisting of the Kabbalistic tree of life. And Nick talks extensively about his views on Kabbalah. I'm going to try to sum it up quickly. Kabbalah, if you don't know, is Jewish mysticism. It's linked heavily into Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, and all of these different occult groups. They're really into Kabbalah, the Kabbalah tree of life, Kabbalic numerology. Hollywood's into Kabbalah. Nick Land has a very interesting view on Kabbalah, one that I don't fully disagree with, which is where this gets crazy. So he says that Kabbalah was intentionally seeded into ancient Babylon by an ancient non-human intelligence. He thinks that this intelligence that seeded Kabbalah in our past are the literal demons of Revelation. He also believes that the Jews' only purpose in existing at all was to carry forward this Kabbalah and to bring it to the modern age where we had the technology for this proto-computational system. He looks at Kabbalah as a linking of system and connections and nodes that we basically use as a predecessor to digital tech, that we designed computer chips and technology on Kabbalah, on this numerology. There is a lot of evidence to that, and this is one of those places where I have to go into another episode to cover it. Land also suggests that this demonic implementation of Kabbalah was meant to guide humanity toward creating artificial intelligence. So again, he believes that eventually the AI would serve as a host body for this non-corporeal intelligence. Basically, that Kabbalah was used to create AI to be a reassembled body of a pre-existing non-human intelligence. And this, he believes, must come about and must destroy human civilization to make way for this intelligence. This is where people get Nick Land wrong. They mix up his ideas with Curtis Yarvin, who wants to destroy the economy to build a monarchy out of its ashes. And we'll talk about Curtis Yarvin in a minute. But Nick Land is completely apocalyptic on this. In 1993, he wrote an essay titled Mechanic Desire. And in this, he wrote, quote, what appears to humanity as the history of capitalism is an invasion from the future by an artificial intelligent space that must assemble itself from its enemies' resources. He compares this to Terminator. He thinks that this links back to his hyperstition. This is a fiction that made itself real because this fiction was echoed into our past through anticipatory emanations from the future. And these emanations from the future, he calls lemurs. You'll literally see him tweet about this thing. He'll say like my lemur brain, and people think, oh, people talk about your kind of base desires as your monkey brain. That's not what he means. Lemurs, according to him, is basically the idea of the Lemurians. This is the first came into Land's writings by way of William S. Burroughs, who wrote The Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar, which drew from the legend of the continent of Lemuria that was invoked by Madame Blavatsky. So this has got some old occult ties. A quick way to explain Lemuria is just think of Atlantis. Just use as a stand-in, right? And so Nick Land literally believes that these lemurs, these demons that he's using his numogram to speak to, that seeded Kabbalah in the world so that they could create AI to become a host body for the demons of Revelation. They come from this place called the outside. And in his view, the outside exists in our future, but also in our distant pre-human past of Lemuria and Atlantis. And I know what a lot of my listeners are thinking right now. These are the Nephilim. These are the beings destroyed by the flood who are wandering in the dry places and are seeding the way for their return in Revelation. That's basically what Nick Land is saying. This is why I don't disagree with him entirely on this part. Sorry, I should be very specific. I don't disagree that it's at least possible that fallen angels, Nephilim spirits, what have you, seeded an ancient occult numerology into humanity to eventually build a body for it to return in Revelation. I just disagree that this is something we should do. Like, this is what he's all about. He is a servant, quite literally, of the Antichrist. And if you read Revelations, in Revelation, it will talk about how man creates the image of the first beast, and the second beast breathes life into this. This is what, in no uncertain terms, Nick Land is simping for. This is what he wants. He says that humans are just a transitional state from biology to code for the ultimate beings. Now, again, I said this a minute ago, but why Nick Land and his ideas are important is not because some crazy weirdo occultist from Warwick University that got fired for doing a bunch of amphetamines, then moved to China. Why would that be interesting? It's because of his influence. First of all, his influence is in Silicon Valley, and it's in Silicon Valley kind of broadly. And the occult influences of Nick Land on Silicon Valley, I'm just not going to be able to get into in this episode. Like I said, there are so many places I want to jump off and go down crazy rabbit trails, and I have done that in other notes, but I'm trying to stay focused and keep this to a decent time frame on this episode. But Silicon Valley adopted accelerationism from Nick Land. They call it effective accelerationism. So you could look at this as Silicon Valley, the tech giants, whatever, as trying to take his accelerationist idea and stripping it of the occult. I think that that's only true in the public facing way that this is talked about, but the occult is so deep in Silicon Valley. Again, that's a different episode. If you guys are interested in it, we can do that on a different episode. But effective accelerationism advocates for accelerating technological process, especially in AI, to solve problems like poverty, war, climate change. They believe that rapid, unrestricted technological advancement is the best path to utopian future driven by capitalism, automation, and the merging of digital and human capabilities. Man becoming machine, man creating machine, half man, CL1 with no oversight. And that idea of effective accelerationism is so strong that when, like, maybe you had the same question that I did when I was talking about the CL1 human brain neuron computer chips. Like, I read about it as some crazy science experiment. And I'm like, well, they're doing it in Australia. Maybe nobody's cool with it. There's articles talking about this where, like, the main question is, how has nobody stopped this? How is there no, like, human rights council about using, creating some type of biological / code life and then trapping it in this, it makes no sense that they're talking about these things as living and then they're using them like computer chips. There's a whole lot of stuff there, but basically, effective accelerationism is about cutting all the red tape, unrestricted, pedal to the metal on deregulation, capitalism to the extreme, merging of digital and human life. Let's cut all the red tape. And anyone who wants to slow this down, wants to slow down the speed of AI development, they call doomers. Deregulation of AI is been a huge part of this current administration, and we'll come back to that. But one of those people that has also been affected by Nick Land is this guy named Marc Andreesen. And he's a venture capitalist. He's the co-founder of Netscape. He's a huge advocate for effective accelerationism in Silicon Valley. And he considers Land a patron saint of this movement, which is very interesting because, again, you could look at effective accelerationism and maybe say, well, yes, Nick Land coined accelerationism, but this isn't really what Nick Land was talking about. Marc Andreesen just says it straight out. Like, this is where we get it from. He is the patron saint of our movement of effective accelerationism. Marc Andreesen also often talks about the cathedral. This is a term coined by Curtis Yarvin, who we'll talk about in a minute, but this is a term that's very championed by Nick Land. And this is the nexus of mainstream institutions that are secretly colluding to set the political and social discourse. So this would be media, academia. And the reason I bring this up is because when I hear terms like the cathedral, people like Curtis Yarvin and Marc Andreesen talking about, there's this kind of semi-religious organization that's moving in the media and moving in academia, and we have to do something to stop them. I don't disagree with this concept. I don't disagree with the, occult or this religious fervor around leftist media and academia and Planned Parenthood and climate change. But that the reason I bring it up is this is why it catches on. I don't want to overstate all of the evil stuff that Nick Land and Curtis Yarvin do, and then not tell you why people are being sucked in, because on the surface level, a lot of what even Nick Land, but especially Curtis Yarvin and others say, you can find yourself agreeing with. I find myself agreeing with some of the things that I'll bring up in this. It's that next step. It's like where these people are leading you. That is where it gets crazy. So when people talk about things like the cathedral, I could agree with that. What I don't agree with is this other thing that Marc Andreesen wrote in 2023, this self-published essay called Techno-Optimist Manifesto. And in this Techno-Optimist Manifesto, Marc Andreesen argues that many significant problems of humanity have been solved with the development of technology, particularly technology without any constraints, and we should do everything possible to accelerate technology development and advancement. So Marc Andreesen, again, kind of championing this idea of like, what if we just took all the roadblocks out and just see where this thing goes? Nick Land's got no shortage of people he's influenced, but in order to keep this episode to a particular length, I'm going to leave a few of them out. One of the people that I found most interesting that I just had to bring up is that Nick Land's influence is so wide-ranging that it even includes Sydney Sweeney. You can see this tweet here from Passage Publishing. Sydney Sweeney reads from Nick Land's Xenosystems, now available for pre-order from Passage Press. And apparently Nick Land is Sydney Sweeney's favorite philosopher for some reason. So I thought it was funny. Look, he again, Silicon Valley, Marc Andreesen, Sydney Sweeney, but the person that's most important that has been influenced by Nick Land is a guy named Curtis Yarvin. I should have left those pictures up because you guys got to see this, nerd. If you're listening to this, just imagine a 60-year-old man that you're pretty sure still gets beaten up for his lunch money. And that's how you'll imagine Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin is an American software engineer and blogger. He blogged under the name Mencius Moldbug, which is just a crazy freaking name. He was inspired by and later worked with Nick Land. And they started together, they kind of started constructing the basis of the ideology that is known as the Dark Enlightenment. And this happened around 2007 when Curtis Yarvin starts his blog called Unqualified Reservations. And in his blog, he argues that American democracy is a failed experiment, that it should be replaced by an accountable monarchy, and similar to governance structures of corporations, that's how we should be run. Basically, the way to think about this is state company governments. Governments ran like startups, right? So instead of having a federal government and states, and look, Jesse James, from Dangerous Info, he pointed out to me that, as I was explaining this stuff to him, I use the term democracy a lot, that Curtis Yarvin and Nick Land are against democracy. That's just the way that they talk about it. The reason that distinction is important is they're not against pure democracy, mob rule, right? Like that's something that I could agree with, but it's kind of when they say democracy, they mean any form of democratic process. They mean they don't like a constitutional representational republic. They don't like people voting for anything. Curtis Yarvin very much is in favor of a complete totalitarian 1984, watch everybody, know everything about everybody state. They don't believe in, elected officials of any kind, just quite literally a CEO monarch, that everyone who lives in a state would be a employee of the CEO monarch. So the way to think about this is like if Texas just became Twitter, if California just became Meta, and, because Texas is Twitter, Elon Musk would be the CEO of that state, and then America would be a grouping of corporations that run everything, your entire life, down to, you are just an employee of the company. You're not a citizen in a country or in a state. You're an employee of a company. And that's the best way to describe Curtis Yarvin's ideas, right? He's got lots and lots of influence. So this is where the influence of this crazy ideas that started with Nick Land, kind of we see how that goes into Silicon Valley. And again, the occult stuff with Silicon Valley, that'll be another episode, but it's there. Curtis Yarvin is influenced by Nick Land, and then Curtis Yarvin, he starts influencing not just Silicon Valley, but politics. And he influences politics at a very high level. One of the people that he influences is JD Vance. JD Vance has said he considers Curtis Yarvin a friend. On a podcast in 2021, he said there's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who's written about some of these things. One has to basically accept that the whole thing is going to fall in on itself. So he's agreeing with, he said he looks up to this guy. He's never specifically championed the CEO monarch stuff of Curtis Yarvin, but the influence is there. And I want to come back to JD Vance in a minute. Another person that has been influenced by Curtis Yarvin and had some very interesting conversations with Curtis Yarvin is a guy named Michael Anton. And he's the deputy assistant to the president for strategic communications. What a mouthful. He sits on the National Security Council right now, and he did a podcast with Claremont Institute, which is kind of a right-wing think tank publication, whatever. I don't know a ton about Claremont, but they have a podcast called The Stakes. And on this podcast, Michael Anton, again, works for the Trump administration today. He discussed with Curtis Yarvin how to install an American Caesar. That was the topic of conversation. So taking Curtis Yarvin's ideas very seriously about, Curtis Yarvin has said we need to stop fearing things like fascism. We need to get over dictator phobia. He said that certain people should be slave races. He's written blogs about incest. I don't want to get off on all the weird, creepy stuff this guy stood for, but he's a creep. Let me just show you guys this again if you're watching. Case in point, evil nerd. Like you can just see the picture. You know that this guy he's into some weird stuff. Sorry, I'm so mean sometimes. There's probably somebody watching this like, I look kind of like that. I'm just joking. This guy doesn't deserve us to be nice to him. Okay. So he's on this podcast, Michael Anton. He's on this podcast that's hosted by the Claremont Institute. It's called The Stakes. He's sitting across from Curtis Yarvin. He's discussing how to install an American Caesar. And on this episode, they start talking about Elon Musk. They both agree that Elon Musk would be the best person to become the next American Caesar, to become the next American dictator, or become the first, I guess. Well, we got FDR, so become another American dictator. And they joke how great it would be to have him. Or, it's not even joking. Like, a lot of it comes across like joking, but they're not really joking. They want to see Elon Musk be a Caesar, but they can't run. So then they start talking about how they wish that Trump would declare himself the living constitution. And, they kind of come to this idea like, yeah, that would be great. But this is where Michael Anton starts saying that he hopes that the deplorables, the people who followed Trump, the people who are anti-establishment, will start to see Trump as not radical enough. That Trump is kind of the stepping stone to who people like Curtis Yarvin and Michael Anton want to see, who will actually come in, make Trump look moderate, and seize control as America's CEO king. And this is so crazy to me because when I very first started learning about the Dark Enlightenment, hearing these terms of CEO monarchy and CEO king, it really harkened back to 2016 for me. So I brought up some articles just to look through. And if you look, you'll see articles like this. And now President CEO. Here's the businessman Trump, and this is how he's going to make government work. Got another article here. Trump is the CEO America needs for an epic comeback. Donald Trump says he'll run America like a business. And it's my belief that these people, other people that we'll mention here in a minute, who had a lot of influence politically and financially over the 2016 election, were really hoping that Donald Trump would be that Curtis Yarvin CEO monarch. And to tie this back to Nick Land really quick, what I find very interesting is that numerology is super important to Nick Land. And one of the things he talks about with his numogram, all these syzygies that add up to 9. I think he says that 4 and 5 is the most important one. He won't explain it. And 4 plus 5 equals 9. There are 45 different connections, 45 different demons that he's using this numogram like a Ouija board to connect with these demonic entities, in his own words. I just have to wonder if 45 was one of his hyperstition kind of things. This hyper superstition that if he could mold his desires around and cast a spell with this demonic sigil around the number 45, that maybe the 45th president would become that monarch CEO that they were looking for, that person that would build the beast system through AI, as Nick Land is looking for, or become the monarch CEO as Curtis Yarvin is looking for. And I really think that that's what they wanted. And we'll come back to that because there's another person who was very involved in Trump and another person in Trump's cabinet's rise to power, and that is Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is connected to Curtis Yarvin. In 2013, Thiel invested in Yarvin's startup, and by 2016, Yarvin is privately emailing Milo Yiannopoulos saying that he's been privately coaching Peter Thiel on his philosophy, on his Dark Enlightenment philosophy, and he's doing this while he's sitting at Peter Thiel's house watching the elections with Peter Thiel in 2016. Yarvin, in his messages to Milo Yiannopoulos, says that in a 2009 essay, Thiel wrote, quote, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." And he's describing, Curtis Yarvin is describing Peter Thiel as a fully enlightened person. Fully enlightened meaning, in Curtis Yarvin's own words, I actually heard him say this on a podcast. I should have brought the clip up, but I didn't. Fully enlightened meaning that he is anti-enlightenment, he's anti-egalitarian, he's anti-democracy. That's what, anti the government being what it is, a representational republic. He's anti-constitution. Like, these are the things that Curtis Yarvin means. He means that Peter Thiel, through Curtis Yarvin's coaching, in Curtis Yarvin's own words, is on board with destroying America to bring about a corporation, a group of corporation city-states, right? So for people who don't know, Peter Thiel. This guy's a super big deal. I've talked about him on other podcasts before. You've probably heard me talk about him with like the whole Blood Boy thing, and he's got some weird stuff. But he is an entrepreneur. He's a venture capitalist. He's a political activist, and he's most famously the co-founder of PayPal and Palantir Technologies. Interesting little side note about Peter Thiel. If anybody's been following this guy for the last year, he has become obsessed with talking about the Antichrist within the last year. And his talks on the Antichrist are always weird, but like I was listening to him in an interview and he was saying that the Antichrist is an idea, a system, a person. You know, he's like, it's all of these things. And maybe at one point it would have shown up as communism, and maybe now it'll show up as something else. We'll come back to that concept in a minute. But eventually he kind of like through his ramblings comes across a term where he describes what he thinks the Antichrist is. And he says, it's the demonia ex machina, which means the demon in the machine, which I find very interesting because the way that Peter Thiel's roundabout explanation of the Antichrist comes back to a machine inhabited by an entity from the outside. He's agreeing with Nick Land in kind of this weird roundabout way. That was just a side tangent. But anyway, Peter Thiel, the reason he's connected all this, the reason it's important, back in 2016, he donated $1.25 million to Donald Trump. He did not donate any money to Donald Trump in 2020. He was disappointed that Trump did not kill the administrative state. He was disappointed that he didn't take off all the red tape around his business and other businesses and push AI and all these things forward the way that he wanted to. And he described the president like an investment that hadn't panned out. So Peter Thiel, again, sitting on a couch with Curtis Yarvin, fully enlightened in 2016, hoping that this Numogram 45 prophecy will come true and they'll get their CEO king. It doesn't happen. In 2020, he's disappointed. He doesn't fund Trump. But then something changed in 2024, and Peter Thiel starts donating to Republicans again. He starts believing in some way in the Trump administration again. And I couldn't find how much he actually gave to Donald Trump in the 2024 election. I couldn't find hard numbers on it. But he does have very, very close ties to someone else in the Trump administration. And if you don't know what I'm talking about JD Vance. JD Vance is basically was created by Peter Thiel from Yale and onward. You can see these articles like this one from CBS News. The billionaire who fueled JD Vance's rapid rise to the Trump VP spot. This is Peter Thiel, by the way. Picture of him if you're watching. His relationship, let me see. At Yale Law, Vance attended a talk by Thiel about technological stagnation and the decline of American elites. In 2019, Vance moved back to his native Ohio, where he started his own venture capital firm, heavily backed by Thiel and other elite investors. By 2021, Thiel was giving Vance all this money. By 2022, Thiel gave $15 million in donations to Vance's super PAC. Basically, long story short, you can read about this plenty of places, and I'm not going to go super into it, but JD Vance kind of even says that he owes his career to Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel finds him at Yale. I think some sources even claim that he kind of put JD Vance through Yale, hires him on to his, investment stuff, funds his Ohio Senate race campaign in 2022, and then backs him for the VP. So I'm looking at this thinking, okay, if Trump didn't pan out the way that they wanted him to in 2016, as Peter Thiel says, he was a investment that didn't pan out. Have the accelerationists, have people like Peter Thiel gotten what they wanted now with JD Vance in office? And there's at least there's a lot of proof that maybe they have. If anybody's been paying attention, the Trump administration has been like pedal to the metal for AI and big tech from day one. In fact, on day 2 of his administration, Trump announced this thing called the Stargate Project, where he gave $500 billion in a bid for AI dominance to people like Sam Altman. And I forget the other guys' names off the top of my head, but yeah, just giving all this money to, Larry Ellison. That's the guy I was trying to think of. Larry Ellison, the chairman of Oracle, Mayosashi's son, the CEO of SoftBank, and Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI. He starts this thing to basically build these massive AI data infrastructure. Basically, we're talking like city-sized server farms, right? This is like the first thing that Trump does right out the gate. By July of this year, he's putting through an AI action plan on how to have AI dominance in the world. And, one of the things that many people notice is this kind of like strange new respect that came for Trump from people like Mark Zuckerberg, who is famously against Trump, against conservatives of all types. I mean, everybody's been on Facebook. They know what that's been like. But this is interesting. So this article from Axios says President Trump hosted the elite of big tech at a White House dinner Thursday evening, including Meta's Mark Zuckerberg and Microsoft's Bill Gates. Bill Gates, this WEF child of all kinds of evil stuff. Now, he's now looking to Trump for something. It says why it matters. This dinner comes at a time when tech leaders are pushing for hands-off government approach to AI. They're looking for an accelerationist approach to AI, and they are cozying up to Trump, who seems to be cutting the red tape, giving them funding. He's also started like this $200 billion AI infrastructure in Qatar project, which is a whole nother rabbit hole to go down to. This all is adding up, and then there's Palantir. So let's talk about Palantir for just a minute, going back to Peter Thiel for a minute. So Palantir was founded in 2003. It was founded by Peter Thiel and Alex Karp. They wanted to take PayPal's fraud detection algorithm and to repurpose it to use against counterterrorism in the Middle East. That's their own words, right? Because of this stated goal, the CIA starts investing in it right away. They use their investment firm InQtel to basically help them fund and develop Palantir's data fusion and analysis tools specifically for the intelligence community. For anybody who doesn't think that Palantir was a CIA project from the beginning, think about it this way. They started based off of funding they got from InQtel, and the CIA was their only client from 2003 to 2008. Doesn't get any more clear cut that Palantir is CIA, right? What Palantir does is it's a data integration and analysis tool. What that means is it pulls data from all these different sources, the Internet of Things, right? It pulls data from your phone. It pulls data from your smart washing machine that people have to have for some reason, your smart refrigerator that keeps track of your food. Think metadata, right? Everything you look at, everything you see, everything you do and talk about online, and way more than that. It's way more than that. But they pull all this disparate data, birth records, financial records, banking records, everything about you. And they put it into a unified system that allows users to analyze and make sense of vast amounts of information. Your metadata put into a profile that knows you, that knows more about you, that knows things you're going to do before you do. I think everybody's been on Instagram at one point or something like that, and they were like thinking about something. They never said it out loud. And I know this because I've talked to tons of people. So I'll say that it's happened to me. I think if you're listening, it's probably happened to you. Imagine a time where you're thinking about something, you haven't said it out loud, and all of a sudden you're getting ads for it. There's different beliefs on this. Do they actually have a way to read your brain, or is this metadata so, and this is what I think, this metadata is so complete that it knows what you're going to think before you do some of the time. It's not God. It's not omniscient. But it's freakily that good is at least the explanation that you get from people who are doing this type of stuff. People who have come from Instagram, they know this. I've even read things. It's like if you're walking in a store and you linger in an aisle too long, especially if it's like a Walmart where they know where every single item is, your phone that's tracking your movement knows that you stopped at corner cap or that end cap and looked at an item. Even if your phone's in your pocket, you never say anything. It knows that you paused there. So then you'll start getting advertisements for the thing that was on the shelf at the Walmart that you paused at. Like, that's how in-depth this stuff goes. That's the type of stuff that Palantir is doing with your data. They went from being a CIA only project to being used by the FBI, the NSA, ICE, U.S. Special Operations Command. They all use Palantir now. So does your police agencies. They have this thing called Palantir Gotham. I've talked to police friends of mine who have told me that when they pull you over, they know what they know about you from reading your license plate, and the information that pops up on you is scary. It's way too much. This is Palantir Gotham. Commercial businesses are using this Palantir Foundry. For some reason, Wendy's comes up on the list of businesses that use Palantir Foundry. So make of that what you will. Alex Karp, the other guy, the other person in this Palantir, this other partner in Palantir, he's bragged about using Palantir to stop the rise of, quote, the far right and shut them down in Europe. He said, quote, our primary goal is to set a global standard our primary goal is to set a global standard for the world for behavior. His entire goal with Palantir is to know everything about you, to know what you're going to do before you do it, to use that metadata, that AI algorithm to shut you down. The best way to think about this, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite movies for a minute. And if you guys don't know, I have another podcast called Real Conspiracies, REEL, Conspiracies like movie reel. And in that I break down, the occult symbolism and hidden messages in movies and video games and stuff like that. I've never covered this movie, but I absolutely want to. It's called Captain America Winter Soldier. It's got, Project Paperclip, MK Ultra, all this stuff in it. But one of the big points of the movie, spoil it for a minute, it's been out for a decade, so if you haven't seen it, it's on you, is that they create this system that knows who is going to stand up against the government when it comes out that it's been infiltrated by Hydra, right? They have all this data on all these people, and they put this battleship up in the air, and it's going to preemptively kill everyone who might stand against it. This is actually Rocco's Basilisk. This is that super intelligent AI with the Palantir data on in the movie, I think they show like how you tested in school, what you voted for, what your opinions are online about this and that and the other, and if you're likely to stand up against the system as it becomes this crazy, crackdown kind of thing. And that's what I think is Palantir. That's actually the stated goal of Alex Karp from Palantir, to make sure that they can set the global standard for how you behave, what you think, all of that stuff. These are the eyes and the ears of the beast system, as I see it. This is the eyes and the ears of the entire thing. This is what's coming from Palantir. I'm going to come back to Palantir in a minute, but I want to talk about another CEO billionaire that has really been looked at over the last couple of years. Maybe that's changed recently. Depends on, people still think this, that there is a billionaire out there who is against this accelerationism, that is against this, Palantir beast system, that is against all the things that we've been talking about. And that mega billionaire CEO is none other than Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk famously said back in 2023, or no, wait, this was before that. We'll get to the 2023 thing in a minute. But he famously said about AI that, quote, we are summoning the demon with artificial intelligence. He believed that super smart machines could take us to Mars, but he worries that they might hold a darker potential, right? So people are seeing this going like, yeah, like he's talking about AI is opening Pandora's box, something that should be avoided. This was a belief of Elon Musk. In fact, he started to really gain people's trust when he was even pushing back against people like Sam Altman and Palantir and things like that. He was saying, look, we need to urge a pause on AI. He cites risks to society. This comes from Reuters. This is for April 5th of 2023. People might remember that Elon Musk back then was saying we need a 6-month moratorium. We need to make sure that we don't put our foot on the gas and accelerate into oblivion and destroy this country and destroy the world based on this, Nick Land idea of let's just let the AI run free and go crazy and destroy the world, to either serve in his idea, the demons of revelation, or in Curtis Yarvin's idea to accelerate the AI to crash the system to build a new utopia. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is that Curtis Yarvin talks a lot about a CEO monarch. but that's almost like a temporary stopgap for what he really wants, because he believes that AI would be the best CEO monarch, that the best way to control society would be to either have it run like a startup or to have it be completely controlled by AI. So Elon Musk would look like, in April of 2023, an anti-accelerationist. Let's forget that he's literally already building Neuralink and all this stuff. What's even crazier than that, and that's what I was pointing out back at the time, I'm like, I don't think that Elon Musk is on the side you think he is. And I was proven right within just a couple of months, because July of 2023, Elon Musk launches this AI called XAI. He's been working on this literally in the background while he's calling for everyone else to pause AI. He's trying to get people to sign a petition. He's petitioning the government. He's petitioning Sam Altman and the CEOs. Like, look, we have to put a pause on it. We all have to, come around and agree what we're going to do and set up parameters. It was all a lie. He was literally building XAI, which would become Grok, in the background, hoping his competitors would pause long enough for him to be dominant. This is actually my belief on Elon Musk, is that he wants it's not that he's against the things that you think he's against, that he wants to be the one that's controlling the things. And we'll come back to him and his relationship with the World Economic Forum in a minute. But we thought he was going to slow down the AI accelerationism back in 2023. That was wrong. It was a lie. So he could build XAI while everybody else was paused. And then we thought, at least a lot of people probably still do think, and I want to make a different argument, we thought that he also wanted to slow down the government corruption, the government waste, because the other part of Nick Land's is capitalism, accelerating government spending, going crazy, all this stuff, crashing the economy, the rise of AI, the rise of the CEO monarch through destruction, right? Like a phoenix rising from the ashes, order out of chaos, order out of chaos, this whole thing, right? That's the Nick Land, Curtis Yarvin thing. We thought, okay, Elon Musk wants to slow down the AI accelerationism. No, he doesn't. Elon wants to slow down the spend ourselves into oblivion and destroy the economy type of accelerationism. And that's where he comes up with Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency. And I'll just share this right off the bat. I don't think that Doge did what people think Doge did. It's not that I don't think that Doge pointed at the right things. What I think really happened is what is called a limited hangout. And what I mean by that is, if you honestly look at what Doge did, we were seeing them point at USAID and say, hey, look, USAID is laundering money, and look at this. This is corporate government waste here, and this is government waste here, and this is government waste here. And look, they're spending $10 billion on trans studies in Iran and all this stuff. And he's pointing it out, right? And he's promising to cut $2 trillion from the national budget. What most people don't seem to realize, and I've been trying to get this through to people for a long time, is that how a limited hangout works is that you point at the thing, people go, yes, that's the thing. And then nothing's done about it, right? Like, I think that most people actually work this way, that they believe that because Elon Musk and Donald Trump pointed at the government waste, fraud, and abuse, that means that we got rid of the government waste, fraud, and abuse. And that's just not what happened. In fact, there's a lot of articles about this. The numbers are weird. I'm going to pull up this one from the BBC. Take it for what you will. But this is what they showed, right? And there's a whole article describing this. I'd like someone to, if I'm wrong, to point me towards how we actually got rid of the government waste, fraud, and abuse, and how we didn't just psyop everyone into thinking that we did because we pointed at the thing. Like, you can expose the thing and then not get rid of it. This is what happened with MK Ultra. This is what happened with the Church Commission in the 1970s. We pulled the CIA into the spotlight, pointed out the fact that they had heart attack guns, and that the FBI had COINTELPRO, and the CIA had MK Ultra, and then we just changed the project names and never got rid of them. Like, people felt like for a long time that those things were gotten rid of. It's just clearly not what happened. That's what I think happened with government waste, fraud, and abuse. The initial pledge from Doge was that they're going to cut $2 trillion. They're going to give us $2 trillion worth of savings. They revised that pledge down to $1 trillion. They then revise it again down to $160 billion. They then revise it again to $61.5 billion. And the only savings that they made, that they have receipts for, is around $32 billion, a drop in the bucket for the government. And then we remember what happened after this. Elon Musk and Trump got into a fight because Trump went, oh, we saved 32 billion. What if we spend 500 billion more on another thing? So government waste, fraud, and abuse didn't go away, but something kind of akin to what happened with Elon Musk saying, hey, let's pause these guys over here so I can quietly work on XAI over here. I think that actually did happen with this. I think there was a greater purpose that we were missing to Doge, and it comes from Alex Karp. He says that Elon Musk's Doge is very good for Palantir, says CEO Alex Karp. And you have to start to dig into like, why was Doge good for Palantir? Well, it turns out that when you give an unelected billionaire, the CEO monarch, control over aspects of the government, they're going to do some things with that control, right? Palantir, this is an article from the Wired.com. It says Palantir is helping Doge with a massive IRS data project. I'll save you the time. You can look up the article if you want to. What it basically says is in order for, again, someone outside of the government to look into the IRS to save us on government waste, fraud, and abuse, which, by the way, Doge found no, quote unquote, no government waste, fraud, or abuse from the IRS, which is a lie, but that wasn't their purpose. The purpose of Doge wasn't to find the waste, fraud, and abuse. The purpose of Doge was to get your tax records and then give your tax record data to Palantir, which is what happened. Doge got all the information to audit the IRS, to audit other things, and now Palantir, which might have had, all this other data from you, now they have your tax records. That goes into that compiling of who you are under their crazy eyes and ears 1984-ish system. In short, Palantir now has your IRS data records thanks to Doge, and that's going to this thing that Trump is now doing. This comes from the New York Times. I had to use Wayback Machine or the archive.org to actually read the article, but it says Trump taps Palantir to compile data on Americans. The Trump administration has expanded Palantir's work with the government, spreading the company's technology, which could easily merge data on Americans throughout agencies. So, in short, there was different parts of the government who had different forms of Palantir, Palantir Gotham, Palantir Foundry, Palantir, whatever the third one was called. And now they're merging all of that data together. It's kind of like the Patriot Act. A lot of people, I think, don't understand the Patriot Act. I had a very interesting conversation about this with a friend recently. Before the Patriot Act, we had the NSA. The NSA has always existed for one singular purpose: to spy on all Americans. And they've been able to do it very effectively for a very long time. When the Patriot Act came around, that power, that abused secret thing that the NSA was doing, then became a way for police agencies to spy on American citizens, warrantless wiretaps, all of that stuff. That's kind of how it worked. I think that's what's working with Palantir now. That kind of NSA, CIA spying operation is now being expanded to where even people like Wendy's can get all this information on you because they're compiling a huge, massive profile on American citizens. In a bigger way, I think it's just that we're accepting it. If you think about 2012, Edward Snowden proved that that the government could read your emails, that it could listen to every single one of your conversations. And in 2012, it was shocking. Now in 2025, we've all just kind of accepted it. And I think that's the way a lot of this works. It's not that the government couldn't spy on you before. It's not that Palantir didn't already have the ability to do all of these things. It's that it's now just kind of in the open. And now we all become, our consent to it by just going along with it just allows for more and more and more abuse. And the next thing will happen, and the next thing will happen. So in a way, it's not, again, that Palantir, the CIA, the NSA, the government didn't have this information. It's that now it's kind of official, and we've just continued to vote for these people. We've kind of given our consent by not doing anything about it. I think that's kind of it in a big way, but also I would say Palantir Gotham is one of those things to look at. The police now getting to know things about you that would terrify Americans if they really knew the level of the type of profile that the government has on you. It's crazy. It's crazy. The last thing I really want to get into in this episode to start to wind it down, talking about the Dark Enlightenment, kind of this first foray into Dark Enlightenment philosophy and its connections and this kind of spider web that there's just so many more things I want to get to in the future, is this kind of idea of the idea of the Hegelian dialectic, this kind of right-left paradigm. And what so often happens is that something is shown from one side of the political aisle, and people freak out and they rage against it, and then they elect the people on their side of the aisle, and because they were so mad about what these people were doing, they're going to accept anything that these people are doing, right? And this kind of back and forth is always going on. The best examples of this really are Obamacare. The Unaffordable Care Act was Romney Care. It was a Republican idea. The left hated it. People like Michael Moore made the movie Sicko about how the Republicans are, in bed with Big Pharma. And then, the left gets Obama and they accept all of those things. They accept the Unaffordable Care Act. They take Romney Care. They call it Obamacare. In the 90s, the Patriot Act was a Bill Clinton initiative. And then we just so happened to have the right crisis come about, the problem that the public reacted to, and then accepted a solution, this problem reaction solution, through a bunch of cave dwellers that just so happened to crash planes into two tall buildings in the Pentagon that never got shot down. And then, Colin Powell walks out onto the Senate floor with a vial of anthrax and says, this much anthrax could kill everyone in this room, and we have to invade Iraq because of this anthrax. Like, we have to invade Iraq, and we have to pass the Patriot Act, says Colin Powell, because of anthrax that the FBI already knew came from an American lab, right? The Patriot Act comes out of this problem reaction solution that was a left-wing idea, and now the right wing, who is mad at the left, who's mad at the Clinton administration, is going to pass this. They want that big boy, that they want that good old boy from Texas to save us from the terrorists. This is what is always happening. And recently, we had this great reset agenda. We heard about Biden. We heard about the World Economic Forum. We heard about their plans for all kinds of crazy things like 15-minute cities, which is, basically a surveillance state city that you can't really go outside of. Everything's there. You're all taken care of. This like nice little communist utopia that's ran by AI. This is the idea of the 15-minute city. We rail against the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset agenda. And then we elect Trump, who's supposed to be against this. And then we get 15-minute cities, we get freedom cities. We go from 15-minute cities, this communist little utopia thing, to freedom cities, which is another type of communist little utopia thing, but it's coded in kind of freedom and big tech and deregulation, all these ideas. We're getting the same thing, but we're taken in by the Hegelian dialectic, and now we're pushing this thing, right? We had AI government was a concept of the World Economic Forum. Governance, and this is from the World Economic Forum, governance in the age of generative AI, a 360-degree approach for resilient policy and regulation. We get this whole idea of using AI to help us come up with policy, to help us govern the masses, right? This is a World Economic Forum agenda. And now we're getting people on the right talking about rage, this idea of retire all government employees. This is our anger at the disgusting things coming out of our government. And now we want to rage against those things. They're using our emotions against us. The problem isn't that it's not that I'm saying, I want this to be clear. It's not that I'm saying we don't need to get rid of career politicians, that we don't need to gut the bureaucratic state, that we don't need to gut the deep state, that we don't need to make government small. I'm for all of those things, and I think many of my listeners are for those as well, and that's why getting behind things like rage seems to make so much sense, unless you realize that the answer to rage, the solution, problem, reaction, solution. Problem, government sucks. Reaction, we're raging against it. Solution, AI government. That is quite literally where this is going. That's what is behind the idea of rage. So again, The left gives us 15-minute cities. The World Economic Forum gives us 15-minute cities. The Great Awakening, the Dark MAGA movement, the Elon Musk Dark MAGA movement, which literally means dark magic movement, black magic movement, is freedom cities. Same thing, different package. AI government from the World Economic Forum, bad. AI government from Elon Musk and this retire all government employees. ChatGPT now giving us government portals. Palantir giving us the government surveillance system. All of that seems to be good because Peter Thiel gave JD Vance and Donald Trump a bunch of money and says some sort of Republican things and pretends to be a Christian and talks about the Antichrist, right? That's how this whole thing is working. That's why it terrifies me, is because right now we're not in a democratic administration. We're not hearing so much about the World Economic Forum. We're hearing and seeing articles about the woke stuff is gone. This new age is coming in and it's good. And just don't look under the hood of this thing. Don't look at what's happening, right? Just a year ago, 2 years ago, it was people like Andrew Yang and crazy, other leftists talking about universal basic income, this you'll own nothing and be happy. Now we're getting Elon Musk, and he also stands for universal basic income, and he also wants you to own nothing and be happy, and he wants you to live in his carbon taxed CEO state thing, right? Like Elon Musk has talked at the World Economic Forum. He stood for all the things that Klaus Schwab has stood for. He speaks out, just like I believe he spoke out against AI. He speaks out against people like Klaus Schwab, not because he disagrees with them, but because he wants to be the one controlling the levers of power. That is really what I think about Elon Musk. If you guys want to see it, I'll do a bigger deep dive on him. I have so many thoughts and things that I found out about Elon Musk that are just absolutely crazy. And so now on the right, you're seeing, and maybe a lot of people aren't seeing this. It's really a lot more on the alt-right. But it's growing. It's growing into, like I said, even JD Vance, influenced by Curtis Yarvin. We're seeing the Nick Land, JD Vance influence. And Nick Land is kind of like the right's version of Yuval Noah Harari. It doesn't matter that Nick Land is a Marxist. Well, he was a Marxist, and he's a anti-Christ worshiping, apocalypse guy. We see Noah Yuval Harari on the left, and now we're accepting more and more prominently ideas of people like Nick Land and Curtis Yarvin. Noah Harari is the WEF version, the World Economic Forum version of Nick Land. He agrees with Nick Land that the future is not human. He calls humans useless eaters. I think I have this tweet here from him. According to the WEF agenda contributor Yuval Noah Harari, rapid advancement in computing technology will make humans redundant, creating a massive class of useless people who need to be kept happy with drugs and computer games, right? This sounds so much like Nick Land. It sounds so much like his accelerationist philosophy. He calls people useless eaters, top advisor at the World Economic Forum. He went on Colbert and spoke about how they were both ready for machines to tell us what to do. He says in the last way that he seems to agree with Nick Land, where I see like it's a left foot taking a step forward, then a right foot taking a step forward. We saw the left foot take a step forward recently with people like Yuval Noah Harari in the World Economic Forum. What I'm worried about is we're going to see the right foot take that same step towards that same goal, and a lot of people will cheer it on because it's not the left. It's not Noah Yuval Harari. It's not Joe Biden. It's not called the Great Reset, right? I mean, geez, it was 2 years ago that people on the right were against the green agenda and electric cars, and now every Republican in the world is like dying to get a Tesla because Elon Musk agreed with them on some stuff, right? Noah Yuval Harari said, only a catastrophe can shake humankind and open the path to a real system of global governance. Other than the fact that it's not a bunch of like BS, like weirdo language, it's just more straightforward. It sounds exactly like Nick Land. And the last point that I want to drive home of why I see this trend as being something to really pay attention to really worry about, this Hegelian dialectic to really worry about, is because I live in Michigan. I remember when Granholm was governor. I remember when she was doing things that were bad for Michigan, that were destroying big cities like Detroit, like Flint. Not that they weren't already on a downward trajectory, but you could look at it that way. And then the answer to that from the right was to stand for something that is absolutely insane. And I remember people standing for it because it was either Rick Snyder's policies or it was, go back to the Granholm policies. And so they just didn't really look into this stuff. But in 2011, Snyder passed this thing called the Emergency Manager Law. And in this law, basically an emergency manager could be put over top of a mayor or any locally elected official, and they could replace mayors, they could replace city council members, they could replace the powers of local government, and they could transfer all the power to this emergency manager. So think of this as like a CEO. This is literally what it was. A CEO selected by the governor of Michigan could go into a place like Lansing, like Flint, like Detroit, and say, you're failing, accelerated it to a point of failure. Now we're going to step in, and a CEO is literally going to take charge of your city, replace your locally elected mayor, replace your locally elected city council, and just step in as a CEO king. It's not that there wasn't a problem. It's not that that Detroit and Flint and Lansing weren't failing. It's that the solution to it was a presupposed solution. Again, this is in 2011, after Curtis Yarvin is making these ideas. I think we've been getting warmed up to this concept. And so that's kind of my nutshell of my fears, my worries, my opinions on kind of the basic philosophy of the Dark Enlightenment. If you guys want to hear more about some of the deeper things that I found, some of the connections, some of the darker places it goes, how things like the occult and ketamine and all of this stuff is influencing some really strange happenings in Silicon Valley. If you want to hear about the occult origins of really Silicon Valley and the computer chips and how they're related to ancient alchemical symbols and all of that stuff, it's some really wild rabbit holes that I would love to take you guys down. If you're interested, leave a comment. I will say this, for people who have been longtime listeners of podcasts I've done over the years, who have supported me over the years, who are happy to see me back doing podcasting. I'm still trying to figure this stuff out. I know that Dark Ocean has not been the podcast that I want it to be yet. And I know that I haven't had the time or ability to turn it into the thing that I want it to be. When I came back to podcasting after a very long hiatus, I told you guys that I was going to try to do Real Conspiracies every other week and Dark Ocean when I could, and that I really wanted to focus on time with my family that I've missed out on over the years. And I'm really enjoying writing. And I want to have time to do that. What I've realized over the last month or so that I've been trying to get back into doing this weekly, I'm not quite sure I'm there yet with the ability to do that. I've been working a lot of overtime. I've been trying to not ignore my family, and I have had to kind of put some of my writing stuff on the back burner. And so I can't promise you that I'm going to do Dark Ocean every single week or every other week. There's some things that I want to see happen if I feel like this is where God wants me to be. And I'm praying about those things. And if they happen, then I would happily, bring this back to a more full-time thing. So if you guys like it, I'm just telling you now, I can't promise you that I'm going to be doing this show every single week or every other week. I'm going to do it when I can. I'm going to try to stay consistent with Real Conspiracies. It's a little bit easier of a show to do. And I haven't, like I said, there's a couple of things that I need to happen in order to do this show the way that I want, the way that I envision it, the way that I think it will be the best show that it can be. So I'm just saying that to all the longtime listeners and friends and followers and fans and all of that stuff. I appreciate you guys for getting me back in the chair, talking to you about this stuff. I hope this is helpful. I hope you've enjoyed it. I just can't make the promises that I want to make to you guys. So I'm saying all that to say the concepts in this are so important for me to talk about that I don't think I've even been able to fully rationalize them here. And I think that one of the ways that I'm trying to play these ideas out in a way that is entertaining and fun and will get you to think is through something that I'm very passionate and excited to share with you guys. I'll stop harping on this all the time, but these are the concepts behind the book that I wrote, Patch Notes Apocalypse. It is a fiction. It is fun. It is silly. It's not super serious, but it's jam-packed with a lot of the research that I've done over the years. And beyond that, it's just a really good and a really fun story. I'm finding a way to put this book out soon as I can on a site called Royal Road, where you can digitally read it for free. You can share it. You can help get that out there. For now, until I am able to do that, I'm putting it up my Patreon. I'll always put the chapters up on Patreon at least 2 weeks before they go up on Royal Road. So you eventually will be able to read this book for free in a digital form. If you want to listen to it, if you want to read it early, or if you just want to support me, because paying an editor and a narrator and all this stuff is very expensive and writing is very time consuming, I just want to ask you guys to go to patreon.com/redactedbook. I think if you found this episode interesting, you're going to like this book. I've had a lot of people who have read this book. I had to kind of pull their leg to read this. Like, it's not my genre. It's not something I would like. I don't really like fiction. I don't like this. I haven't had a single person who's actually read this book not tell me that they really enjoyed it and it was far better than they thought it would be. I truly believe in this book. I think it's something you should check out. So please, even join get a free membership and check out some of the stuff. The first so many chapters are just free. You don't have to pay anything for them, but the support would really help. Other than that, I just want to ask you guys to pray for me. Tell me what you'd like to see. Be patient with me as I'm trying to put these out and, manage a work-life family balance and have time to do the things that I feel called to do, like writing. I'll get off my soapbox now. Hope this episode was helpful. I'll see you next week on Real Conspiracies. I think the next thing I'm covering is Snake Eyes. That's right, Snake Eyes. So come over to Real Conspiracies, and I'll see you guys there. Until next time, God bless.